A great deal has been written about Abraham Lincoln, and almost every formal area of information has been explored. Yet for most who have written about him, Lincoln as a person remains extremely mysterious. His inner moods, the powers, forces which directed his destiny, are simply not material for the average biographer, especially as in biography, writers are more inclined to interpret themselves than the subject of their material. A number of years ago, I spent some time in the Chicago Historical Society checking their vast collection of material relating to Abraham Lincoln. It seemed to me that there might be something a little more than was broadly known, and the curator of the society was kind enough to assist me and to, in a large measure, support my own thinking. He expressed it somewhat in this way. He said, "We have here a great deal about Mr. Lincoln, and from the material itself, when gathered together, we come to certain inevitable overtones, attitudes, convictions, circumstances that cannot be completely interpreted. There is a mystery about it all. This mystery, according to one old villager who lived near Lincoln's birthplace, began with the actual birth of Abraham Lincoln. He came from a rather isolated, remote part of the country at that time. It was an agricultural district largely dominated by the beliefs and opinions of simple people. The circumstances surrounding the birth of Lincoln began the legend that was to follow him throughout life. In the midst of the night, a storm struck that region such as had never been recorded by local people. As one old man had said, it seemed as though the sky opened. They had never beheld such a mass of celestial phenomena. The weather was, of course, stormy, but lightning of prodigious strength crashed through the mountains and the hills and the valleys, making a sound, as he said, like the trumpets of war. The birth of Lincoln has also been subject to a considerable amount of speculation when he was born. According to the records in the Historical Society, he was born at the time that his father was on his way to church. It was quite a distance. The father went in an old-fashioned horse and buggy. Before he reached the church, a neighbor rode up and told him that the boy was born. He hurried back and arrived shortly afterward. From the calculations that were possible to make at that time, I arrived at my own conclusions concerning the probable birth hour of Lincoln. This was later supported by research done in England that came to within a few minutes of the same time that I had selected. This is not the commonly accepted birth hour, however. From his early life, Lincoln exhibited all of the basic tendencies that today we associate with an involved personality, possibly even a highly neurotic one. But in those days, no one measured things in terms of neurosis. A man's inner life was his private business, so long as he lived an honorable existence. Lincoln's early struggle for education is well known. The reverses of his early life, the tragedy of Anne Rutledge, certainly contributed to the general psychological makeup of the man. He was also endowed by nature with prodigious capacities of mind, One writer explains it in this way, that Lincoln's great mental strength seemed to arise from the strange silence which he was able to maintain within himself. On many occasions in his law cases it was supposed that Lincoln was asleep, but he was not asleep. He was in a very deep, receptive mental mood, a mood so profound that he could remember all of the evidence of a case without making a note. He kept everything by being very quiet and letting it sink into himself. This quietude also was Abraham Lincoln's link with the larger universe, the reality of which he accepted. The religious life of Lincoln has, of course, been a cause of a great deal of speculation. Shortly before his death, the president summarized the state of his religion in a very definite statement, that he had never made any religious announcement during his lifetime. He had never formally associated himself with any church. Once he explained his reason for so doing, for his attitude in this, and I think the reason obviously arises from the condition of the society in which he lived. He was not only a war president, but a president torn between the peoples of his own country, a divided country. The Civil War was not only a political problem and a great military tragedy. The Civil War was also a great religious problem. At that time, religious feeling in the North and South ran extremely strong. And Lincoln was unable to understand how it could be that two groups of people, both basing their philosophy upon the Bible, both deriving their authority from the words of Jesus, both preaching from their pulpits, "Love ye one another," could become locked in so terrible a controversy as that which arose religiously during the Civil War. To him, this was beyond understanding. He could not see why people who held the same faith, who believed in the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of men, who believed in the divine right of all beings to live, he did not understand how these people could lock themselves in a great controversy over some such an issue as the Emancipation Proclamation. To Lincoln, this was a great personal hurt. He referred to it on a number of occasions, and I think there can be no doubt that this was the reason why he never made a religious affiliation. Not because he was not religious, but because, as he said on one occasion himself, if he could find a church or a denomination which had as its total creed that men should love God with all their hearts and all their souls and all their minds, and their brothers as themselves, when he found a church that had no more creed than that, he would join it. But the Civil War period was not the time in which such a church was apt to arise, because the religion was strongly involved in the political situation. That Lincoln had a certain sense of a divine destiny also cannot be doubted. He felt that he had been born for the benefit of mankind. He felt that his life was tied into a great necessity, and that this necessity was not for his own time, but for future times and ages yet unborn. He felt that a strong stand had to be taken, and while some may and others may not approve of his decisions entirely, there is no question in the world that Lincoln believed these decisions to be the most necessary in all of the history of his country, and that without these decisions being clearly made, the future of the country would remain uncertain and subject to constant internal discord. In the course of his life, Lincoln also reports a number of experiences which came to him which were essentially metaphysical. He made no effort to explain them, but it is obvious that within his own consciousness he accepted them. He accepted them for what they were: omens, portents, revelations. He never seemed to have cast them off on the grounds, for instance, that they were hallucination within himself. He was moved by them, he held to them. He accepted them with a certain quiet dignity, as though such procedure were natural and quite within the common scope of things. Very little was ever made of these experiences other than to record them. No one asked why they happened. Apparently Lincoln never asked why they happened. But he certainly did accept a series of very strange occurrences, most of them of a rather fatalistic nature. He felt quite certain within himself that he was aware of the general condition of the nation, and that he had dreams, visions, premonitions bearing upon the various phases of the country's destiny. A number of these are recorded, some in his own words and others in the words of those who were near him. These have never been questioned or doubted, because they fitted so perfectly into the general nature of the man himself. Of course, perhaps one of the most famous of these is his recurrent dream of the ship under sail. On several occasions this dream came to him, of a ship sailing out into an unknown sea. This ship, to himself at least, was both the ship of the state and the ship of his own life. And shortly before his death, this dream recurred, and he was convinced that it had some strange portent for him, that it meant something peculiar and remarkable to himself. One of the most unusual of these mystical dream experiences relating to Lincoln is that which occurred about the time of the beginning of his second term of office. On this occasion, he was asleep one night when it seemed as though he was awakened. He was actually asleep, as he tells us afterwards, but he had the experience of awaking within a dream and noting the extraordinary silence of the White House. The silence was so keenly oppressive that in the dream Lincoln was disturbed by it. And then over this silence there came a sobbing, a very soft, wailing cry that seemed to gain in intensity until it sounded as though many people were weeping together. In his dream, Lincoln arose and walked about through the rooms of the White House, trying to find out what was the cause of the dream, or what was the cause of the sobbing. At last he came into the East Room, and there he saw a military guard drawn up around a body that lay in state. He turned to one of the mourners, whom he now saw, and said, "Who is this who has died?" And the mourner replied in the dream, "It is the President of the United States. He has been assassinated." Lincoln awoke at this moment, considerably affected by the dream, and told those around him that he considered it an almost certain omen that he would not complete his second term in the White House. He also had another recurrent dream that had quite an effect upon his own mind. About the time of his first nomination, he had a peculiar experience that he was never sure whether it was a dream or not. The campaigning had been rather severe, and Lincoln had thrown himself down on a bed to rest. The bed faced a bureau, or a chest of drawers, over which was a slanting mirror. In the mirror, Lincoln saw his own face reflected, and was amazed to see that there were two faces. These two faces were very closely together, but as he says, the two nose ends were about 3 inches apart, one beside the other. One face was very clear. The other was a very strange pale gray. Disturbed by what he had seen, Lincoln got up and went over to the mirror and looked carefully, but as soon as he moved, the vision disappeared and everything was apparently normal. When he returned, however, and lay down on the bed, again the faces became double. He was disturbed, coming to the conclusion at that time that it represented